pensions.
Well, I thank Chairman Klein for this. I was just inquiring, it's good to be at a Senate House conference of this committee. I was just asking, the last conference I'm informed of this committee, where, as Patty says, we sat down and across from each other, was 2008 on higher education, which means that about half of the United States Senate have never been to a conference, and I think this is a good start, so I look forward to this. I'm reminded, John, of what my old boss, Senator Howard Baker, once said. He said there are two things he never understood. One was the Middle East, and one was the United States House of Representatives. And I'm sure that that's what your members say about us.
Every day.
Every day, and I've heard it. But I have a purpose in my early remarks here today. I want to nominate John Klein to be chairman of this conference. He doesn't need a long introduction, but he's perfectly trained for his work. He was a Marine. He's a 25-year veteran of the Marine Corps. He carried the nuclear weapons instructions for two presidents of the United States, which have perfectly trained him to serve in the U.S. House of Representatives and of chairman of an education conference on a bill that has alligators lurking in every pond. So he has been really terrific in the discussions that we've had. This is a difficult issue, but we've worked very well. It's been a pleasure to work with him and with Bobby Scott, I would say, and with Patty Murray on the Senate side. So, having said that, I move that Chairman John Klein be chairman of our conference committee. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? The ayes have it. Mr. Klein, you are our chairman.
Thank you. I thank the gentleman, and I take note of his observation of how long it's been since we've had a conference, not only of this committee or these committees. We're pretty doggone rusty in the conference business. So I say that to get my excuses out early in case I make a mistake. Bobby will elbow me, or Virginia. So let's get to it. We meet as a conference committee to consider extremely important legislation, S1177, the Every Child Achieves Act of 2015, and the House Amendment. Today we meet in order for conferees to share brief opening statements. Our timer will be operating with a yellow light signaling you have 1 minute remaining so that you can adjust your comments. I expect many of our conferees will want to make opening statements, and this approach will allow us to hear from everyone. Conferees are welcome to submit a written statement for the record, and the record will remain open to the end of the day for conferees to do so. I begin by recognizing myself for an opening statement. I want to thank our colleagues for being here today, all of them. It's not every day that the House and Senate come together for a formal conference. The fact that we are here reflects a commitment to follow regular order where members on both sides of the aisle and on both sides of the Capitol can participate in an open legislative process and help make a difference in the lives of the American people. This week, we have an opportunity to take the next step in a long process to improve K-12 education. We are continuing an effort to replace the old, failed approach to education with a new approach that will help more children receive the excellent education they deserve. Addressing the problems with federal education policies is something we have neglected for far too long. No Child Left Behind has been the law of the land for nearly 14 years, and it officially expired 8 years ago. The law was based on good intentions, but it was also based on the flawed premise that Washington should decide what students need to excel in school. Parents, teachers, and superintendents have been telling us for years that this approach isn't working. Everyone here knows it isn't working. Children from across the country are trapped in failing schools. The nation's report card recently revealed achievement in reading and math declined for the first time in 25 years. And in many neighborhoods, students are more likely to drop out than to earn a diploma. Rather than step up and change the law, Congress stepped back and let the administration set national policy through conditional waivers. Instead of providing states and schools relief from the law, these controversial waivers have led to greater confusion and uncertainty. Parents and state and local leaders are more frustrated than ever with the federal government trying to micromanage schools in their communities. The American people have waited long enough for Congress to do its job and replace No Child Left Behind. Fortunately, both the House and Senate have finally passed proposals intended to do just that. Now it's up to us to resolve the differences between those proposals and work to send a final bill to the President's desk. Toward that end, staff and members have discussed where we might find areas of common ground and developed a framework I believe will result in a successful conference. I'm very pleased that the framework advances the three basic principles House Republicans have long championed. First, the framework reduces the federal role in K-12 education. One-size-fits-all federal policies dictating accountability and school improvement are eliminated. Dozens of ineffective and duplicative programs are repealed. New and unprecedented restrictions are placed on the Secretary's authority. This proposal will significantly reduce the size of the federal footprint in our nation's schools. Second, the framework restores local control by returning to state and local leaders the primary responsibility for accountability and school improvement. The framework protects the right of states to opt out of federal education programs, as well as provides new funding flexibility so federal resources are better spent on priorities set at the local level. Third and finally, the framework empowers parents. We continue to promote transparency about school performance so parents have the information they need to do what's best for their children. We also strengthen the charter school program and magnet school program to offer parents greater choice. These are just a few ways the framework advances the principles House Republicans have long supported, and no doubt additional details will be discussed during the day's meeting. We compromised on the details, but we did not compromise on our principles. That's why I urge my colleagues to support this agreement and help us move one step closer to replacing a flawed law. I'd like to end my remarks where they began. We're here because we are committed to regular order where members on both sides of the aisle can share their views and offer ideas. I look forward to hearing from our colleagues today and to moving this important process forward. I now recognize the distinguished chairman of the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, Chairman Alexander, for his opening statement.
Thank you, John, Representative Scott, and Senator Murray, ladies and gentlemen. We're here today for one reason, because I sat down with Patty Murray in January, and she gave me some good advice, and I took it. And the advice was, why don't we see if we can develop a bipartisan beginning to this bill, because we had failed in the last two Congresses, and as a result, we ended up with a bill that was passed by the Senate after many amendments, 81-17. Newsweek magazine recently reminded us what we already know very well: No Child Left Behind is a law that everybody wants fixed. Governors, teachers, superintendents, parents, Republicans, Democrats, students, they all want the law fixed. There is a consensus about that, and fortunately, there's a consensus about how to do it. And that consensus is this: continue the law's important measurements of academic progress for students, but restore to states, school districts, classroom teachers, and parents the responsibility for deciding what to do about improving student achievement. That's why the bill passed the Senate 81-17. That's why the bill had the support of the nation's governors, chief state school officers, school superintendents, the National Education Association, and the American Federation of Teachers. There were some differences between the House and Senate bill. Fundamentally, they were based upon that same consensus. Both and the waivers, through which the U.S. Department of Education has become, in effect, a national school board for more than 80,000 schools in 42 states. Both end the federal Common Core mandate. Both move decisions about whether schools and teachers are succeeding or failing out of Washington, D.C., and back to states and communities and teachers where those decisions belong, because the real way to higher standards, better teachers, and real accountability is through states, communities, and classrooms, not through Washington, D.C. That's why I believe this conference will be successful. Both houses will approve our conference work product, and I believe the President will sign the legislation into law. Even though this agreement, in my opinion, is the most significant step toward local control in schools in 25 years, some Republicans would like to go further. I am one of those. But my Scholarships for Kids proposal, which would have given states the option to allow federal dollars to follow children to the schools their parents choose, only received 43 votes in the Senate. We need 60. So I've decided, like a president named Reagan once advised, that I'll take 80% of what I want, and I'll fight for the other 20% on another day. Besides, if I were to vote no, I'd be voting to leave in place the federal Common Core mandate, the National School Board, the waivers in 42 states. Let me repeat, voting no is voting to leave in place the Common Core mandate, the National School Board, and waivers in 42 states. There are a lot of people counting on us, 50 million children, 3.4 million teachers in 100,000 public schools. The law expired 8 years ago. If it were strictly applied, every school in America would be a failing school. Teachers and children have been waiting all that time. If this were homework, they'd give us a failing grade for being tardy. So I hope we'll remind ourselves, and this is my conclusion, that it is a great privilege to serve in the United States House of Representatives and the United States Senate. That there is no need for us to have that privilege if all we do is announce our opinions. We could do that at home, or on the radio, or in the newspaper, or on a street corner. As members of a Congress, after we have our say, our job is to get a result. We're not the Iraqi Parliament. We're members of the United States Congress. And I hope we will demonstrate that we cherish that privilege and that we cherish our children by building upon this consensus, fixing the law that everybody wants fixed, and showing that we are capable of governing by bringing badly needed certainty to federal education policy in 100,000 public schools. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. I now recognize my colleague on the House Education Workforce Committee, Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank you for convening us here this afternoon. We've literally and figuratively come a long way since we were on the floor debating H.R. 5, the Student Success Act, in February and then again in July. I had sincere objections to much of that bill, but thanks to the earnest and diligent work of you, Mr. Chairman, and our counterparts in the Senate, Senator Alexander and Senator Murray, and many long nights and even overnights from our respective staffs, I can say that I fully endorse the framework that we produced for this conference. It is an embodiment of what we can achieve here in Washington, a workable compromise that does not force either side to desert its core beliefs. When I spoke on the floor during the proceedings of H.R. 5, I began by highlighting how the modern federal role in elementary and secondary education began with the Brown decision. In that pivotal, unanimous decision, the court held that no child could reasonably be expected to succeed in life if denied the opportunity of an education, and that right is a right which must be made available to all on equal terms. While education would remain a fundamentally local issue, we recognized in the years following Brown that our local funding system, basically on the real estate tax, would continue to produce large gaps in equity and gaps that the federal government had a responsibility to fill. And so in 1965, with the introduction of the first Elementary and Secondary Education Act, Congress provided federal money to address, and I quote from the original bill, the special educational needs of children of low-income families and the impact that concentrations of low-income families have on the ability of local educational agencies to support adequate educational programs. So ESEA was designed and works best when it provides funding targeted to schools and students who get left behind in an unequal system. The framework that we will be considering in this conference lives up to the promises of Brown and the intent of the original ESEA. It does this by building on the past reauthorizations of the law while addressing the key challenges presented by the most recent reauthorization of ESEA, No Child Left Behind. And the framework does this in a bipartisan fashion. The framework puts into place assessment, accountability, and improvement policies that will close the achievement gap not with federally mandated solutions, but with locally designed, evidence-based plans. The framework ensures that high standards for all children will be maintained, but it does not set a national curriculum and mandates neither what is taught or how it is taught. The framework requires state and local action when students aren't learning, but stops short of prescribing what action that must be. This framework requires data reporting to ensure that schools are responsible for the achievement of all of their students, but does so in a transparent way, respectful of student privacy. And an important step forward, the framework recognizes the importance of early learning, a priority in both red and blue states alike. Over the next few days, we'll talk through and debate provisions of this framework, and we'll have the opportunity to be heard and present changes to it. But if we remain committed to the same bipartisan process that created this framework, I have no doubt that we can produce a conference report that will make a positive difference in the lives of our nation's students and live up to all of our ideals. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I thank him. I now recognize the distinguished ranking member of the Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, Senator Murray, for her opening comments.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I'm very glad that both Democrats and Republicans from the House and the Senate have reached this critical point. Today marks another step towards a goal I know everyone in this room shares, and that is fixing the badly broken No Child Left Behind law. I want to thank Chairman Klein, Chairman Alexander, Ranking Member Scott, as well as all of our staffs who've worked so hard to set up what I am very optimistic will be a successful conference. I also want to thank all of our conferees who are here with us today. Throughout this process, I have truly valued the feedback and the input our Senate committee members have provided, and I look forward today to everybody's remarks and thoughts during this conference. This week, we will be talking about recommendations for moving forward in this conference committee. This framework for our discussion is the result of a lot of hard work, some very tough conversations, and serious compromises. And the feedback from all of you during this process has been critical. It's not what I would have done on my own. It's not what any single member of this conference would do on his or her own, but I'm very proud that we were able to use regular order. We marked up and passed bills in each committee and each chamber to get to this point. And together we have worked to break through the gridlock and dysfunction that too often dominates in Congress. There is one thing everyone in this room agrees on. No Child Left Behind is broken, and it is long past time to fix it. For one, the current law requires states to set standards for schools, but then failed to give them the resources they needed to meet those standards. My home state of Washington has been particularly hard hit by this broken law. NCLB has been so unworkable that the Department of Education began issuing waivers, as we all know, to exempt states from the law's requirements. But last year, Washington State lost its waiver. Now, nearly every school in my home state is labeled as failing. That is exactly the wrong message we need to be sending to teachers who put their heart and soul into their classroom. And it is the wrong message to send to parents and communities who deserve more certainty about the quality of education their students receive at our public schools. So I'm very glad that after we passed the bills through the House and Senate, we had significant differences, but we were able to continue working together to come into conference with a good framework for getting this done. We've built on our two bills and made a number of key improvements. For example, we have a good path forward to give states more flexibility, a key priority for many people here today, but it will also include strong federal guardrails, which is a key priority for many others, so students don't get left behind. We also include some good ideas for bringing the House and Senate bills together in a way that will help our states and school districts reduce the number of unnecessary and redundant tests. And I'm personally glad that our recommendations set up a path to make strong investments in states to improve preschool programs and expand access so students will enter kindergarten ready to learn. We've come a long way in our work to fix the broken No Child Left Behind law. We haven't quite finished crossed the finish line yet, but I'm looking forward to having a very productive meeting here today, meeting again tomorrow, and working together to reach an agreement on a bill that can pass both chambers of Congress and the President can sign into law. This is so important for our children and families, but it is also about the future of our country. Many of us agree about the importance of growing our economy from the middle out and making sure we have a workforce that can fill the jobs of the 21st century economy. Making sure our education system puts students on a path to success is one of the most important things we can do to accomplish that goal. So I am looking forward to taking another step closer to a future where teachers and parents and communities can be confident that when our nation's students step into a public school, they have the chance to succeed, regardless of where they live or how they learn or how much money their parents make. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the senator for her comments and for her work and for her staff, and Mr. Scott for his, and Senator Alexander for his work and his staff, and my staff, which arguably is the best maybe in the world, I don't know, but the tremendous work that they have done. I would now, I'm sorry, although those, yeah, okay. Staff did an incredible job. You mentioned sometimes they went with no sleep, and that's true. They worked really, really hard. I would now like to offer our conferees the opportunity to share opening comments. As has already been agreed, I ask my colleagues in both bodies to limit your comments to 3 minutes each, and I now recognize Dr. Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be very brief. I just want to say to Senator Alexander. I am very grateful to serve here in the House and on this conference committee and on the Education Workforce Committee. And I also want to thank the staff and all the members who've been involved in getting us to this point. And I'm going to give everyone a gift and yield back the balance of my time.
I love this woman. I thank the gentlelady, and now recognize Senator Enzi from Wyoming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Almost a year ago, we set out in a bipartisan way to fix the broken No Child Left Behind law. I'm proud of the work that's been accomplished by the Senate, the House of Representatives, and the administration. I'd like to commend Chairman Alexander for his work in advocating for our Senate Republican priorities, and I'd like to commend Senator Murray for her work in advocating for the Democratic priorities. While I do not like all of the proposed compromise, and I'm certain that everyone here can express that same sentiment, the recommendation that the chairman has offered us today sends control over our nation's schools back to where it belongs, with states and local communities. We Wyomingites are proud of our school system. We're proud of the way that we support our students, our educators, and our staff. We're proud of the way that our schools help students prepare for what's next and ensures they have the tools necessary to succeed in the rapidly evolving society. This compromise ensures that Wyoming teachers and school leaders and students and parents have the power to tailor the education to meet the needs of all of the students, even in the smallest, most rural schools. I have strong concerns regarding the early childhood education language in this compromise. I do not think the federal government has made a solid effort to consolidate the over 40 funding streams for early childhood education. That said, I'm glad to see that a consolidation and coordination report, a report required by my amendment during the Child Care and Development Block Grant debate, must be used to inform early childhood activities. I believe that supporting children from the earliest of ages is crucial to their development, but there's no reason the federal government should have over 40 programs for such an effort. I was a member of the Conference Committee for No Child Left Behind, as were a few of my colleagues here today, but that law should have been reauthorized years ago. I'm grateful for the opportunity to work on this reauthorization and to help fix the flawed system that it created. As a grandfather, I look forward to hearing from my grandkids about the innovative ways that they'll be learning and less about the prep for the test that we've had for too long now. I commend the members of the Conference Committee for their work on this compromise, and I look forward to having a new law in place soon. I yield back.
Complex machine here. Thank you, Senator Enzi, and now recognize the gentlelady from Ohio, Ms. Fudge.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Today we began the long-awaited conference to reauthorize the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. Our nation's students, their parents, and teachers are counting on us. I look forward to working across party lines to develop a reauthorization bill that ensures all students have access to a world-class education, that states set high standards and goals to make certain students graduate prepared for a successful future, and strong accountability measures are in place for children and families. Education is the great equalizer, opening doors of opportunity for all. This year, we commemorated the 50th anniversary of President Johnson signing the original ESEA. The bill was essentially civil rights legislation that affirmed the right of every child to a quality education. Our goal in this conference should be to reinforce ESEA's original intent: equity in education for all of America's students, regardless of their background or zip code. While no bill is perfect, I believe the framework before us is a step in the right direction. I am pleased that it protects Title I funding, assures equitable allocation of resources to schools, recognizes the importance of after-school education, and maintains subgroup disaggregation of data for reporting. I note it has been proposed that some education programs be placed into the new Student Support and Academic Enrichment Grant Program. I would have preferred consolidation of fewer education programs into a single block of funding. However, the new program is formula-based and does distribute dollars to fill resource and opportunity gaps based on need and population, which is something I support. Further, I am concerned about the increase for the federal charter school program. But I do agree with the focus on strengthening the program's accountability and transparency requirements. All negotiations require compromise, and this framework seeks to strike a balance that is in the best interest of our nation's students. The final bill reported out of this conference committee must provide equal educational opportunities for all children, regardless of race, ethnicity, income, language, or disability. Poverty should not be an obstacle to student success. I look forward to working together to guarantee that education in America opens the doors of opportunity for all students. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Now the senator from Maryland. Senator Mikulski is recognized.
Thank you very much, Chairman Klein, and it is a sheer delight to actually be in a real conference committee. I thought I would retire before I saw this again, and when Senator Alexander announced that we were going to have a real conference, I knew that some of my colleagues had never been to one, and those who come either from executive branch, backgrounds, or whatever, that maybe we had to see videos to even see what it was. So I really want to salute you, sir, and the House members, but also to Senators Alexander and Murray, because their pathway to success was based on the concept of restoring regular order in a way that we could proceed, in a way that was fair, open, transparent, and a way for resolving conflict. So I salute you on the process. And I don't think I should be penalized by the lights going out. I feel like the Academy Award. Mr. Chairman, in the interest of time, I ask unanimous consent that my full statement be in the record, but I want to say that I think this is a bill that is one that I have supported and look forward in supporting this process to make sure that our children are ready for 21st century learning to face the 21st century challenges. I represent over 2 million children from the state of Maryland. Some are the children of Nobel Prize winners. Some are first-generation Americans. Some come from the most destitute of poverty. But they're all in my state, and they're guaranteed, as under the Brown decision, this equal education. I think we go about it. We remedied the wrongs of the past in which we over-tested our kids and over-regulated our teachers. I think we have focused on parents, children first, recognizing that the first teacher is always the parent, that the parents must be involved, but we also improve flexibility, we improve accountability, but also with those strong guardrails, and we also add to our teachers things that are very important to me, which is the integrated services or services that help our teachers be able to do the job. One of the things that have been included in the bill are the fact that school nurses will be recognized as a valuable member of the school education team and recognized for Title II funding and their participation. Many of us are in and out of schools. We know that whether it's the child with the peanut allergy, the one with the asthma inhaler, and so on, the role that the teachers need support in order to do that. We're also appreciative of what you did in the Title I funding to make sure that changes in the formula did not disadvantage, did not create disadvantage. Every school district in my Maryland, under some of the changes proposed, would have lost money. The changes that have been arrived at now, I think, are equitable and fair. There are much to be said, but let's say it during the amendment process. Hats off for returning to regular order. I'm glad I saw it before I left. I'm glad I saw it before I die. I'm glad I'll see this to the finish process.
I thank the senator. Her full statement will be entered in the record. It might be just a little over the top, but thank you very much for your comments. I now recognize the gentleman from Tennessee, Dr. Rowe.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to ask unanimous consent that my written statement be placed in the record. I had an experience Sunday that I'm going to share with you all that shows you the importance of what we're doing here. I live just down on Pennsylvania Avenue, Potomac, across from a little charter school, and I was going through the Harris Teeter buying some groceries. And this youngster, I think he was probably 10 to 12 years of age, came and he said, "Can you help me find some crushed pineapple?" I said, "Sure, I can help you do that." He said, "I can't read." And that dawned on me. I've got 2 grandchildren that child's age. We have failed that child. when that child could not read to pick up even what a pineapple was. I was heartbroken, I've got to tell you, to see that and to know that that child has no future if he cannot read. So that's what we're doing here, why it is important, and why we got back to regular order, and why we get this right. And I wanted to share that with you because it absolutely motivated me to be on this committee and to do what I think is right for the American children. That one child we have grossly failed. So I challenge all of us to work hard at this and get this across the finish line, get it signed into law, and help educate America's children. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Now recognize the senator from Alaska, Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too feel like it's a historic day. I started off this morning as a conferee on the transportation bill, and I'm spending the afternoon as a conferee on the education bill. Really, when was the last time we were able to say we were doing this kind of work? So it's a good day. Like so many parents, educators, school board members, students, I've been waiting to fix No Child Left Behind, some 14, 15 years. Of course, it was enacted with some great intentions to ensure that every child has access to an education that's going to prepare them for that bright future, but it just didn't work that way. And the end result is we are cleaning up what I think was a mess. The first year of its implementation, I was president of my son's PTA in a public school in Anchorage. And my son's school didn't make adequate yearly progress that year. We were deemed a failure, and we were deemed a failure because there were 2 kids that were sick on the day of the test, and we didn't meet the 95% participation group mandate in the subgroup, and so we're a failing school. And I have been frustrated with the law ever since. And it was not just with AYP, it was the highly qualified teacher requirements that really demeaned experienced, excellent teachers and stressed the very, very small schools in rural Alaska that were trying to find teachers who could meet the requirements to teach multiple subjects. I was frustrated with mandates like the school turnaround models that resulted in Alaska's largest district turning down hundreds of thousands of dollars because firing the principal that was leading the school just didn't make sense for improvement. So we moved forward. Then we dealt with the waivers coming out of the administration. I was frustrated with those waivers that came with strings that didn't work much better for Alaska than what we had in place. So I was so pleased when in April, Every Child Succeeds passed out of the Senate Help Committee unanimously, and I credit to the leadership of Senator Alexander and Senator Murray. And then when it passed out of the Senate with strong bipartisan support, it does provide our states more control, local control, keeps what works. It gives flexibility to the school boards and educators to serve the communities as they see fit. There is a lot, there is a great deal in Every Child Achieves that I'm proud of for my state and for each of us who have contributed to it. And again, I want to also acknowledge the good work of not only Senator Alexander and Murray and each of their staff, but for all of the staff that have been working on this to get us to this place. I especially appreciate the support of both my Senate and House colleagues for provisions that mean a lot to Alaskans, reducing the paperwork burdens of very rural school districts under impact aid, allowing Alaska Native tribes and tribal organizations to take the lead in providing supplemental educational services for Alaska Native students. And I thank him for supporting 2 provisions that will have a nationwide impact. That's the 21st Century Community Learning Centers program, support for Native language immersion schools, and requiring schools to consult Native American and Alaska Native parents with how their children will be served. These are good provisions that, again, I'm very appreciative. I am concerned, though, that we've been presented with a product, notes and charts for the Every Child Succeeds that hasn't been vetted by educators and school board members who are going to have to implement it. And knowing that we have a framework is one thing, but you and I all know it's always the devil's in the details. I am pleased with where we are with the product that we have in concept. I'm going to be very interested in what we do tomorrow with the amendments and what may be brought forward. But again, I thank so many for getting us to this point and making sure that the product that we put in place for the next decade is good for all of our children.
I thank the senator. The gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Polis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I come before this conference committee particularly excited. It's been a long haul for many educators, a long haul for many parents of students. It's also an issue that I've been involved with for some time. I was on the State Board of Education from 2001 to 2007 in Colorado when we implemented No Child Left Behind. And to those in the room who were authors of that, I first want to praise the tremendous step forward for civil rights, for transparency that came with that law. At the same time, when we were implementing that law in the early 2000s, we saw so many of the flaws. We saw the very superficial nature of the inflexible, adequate yearly progress formula. We saw the way that it restricted flexibility rather than enhanced flexibility at the state and local level. I'm proud to say that there's a stronger framework before us today. While it's a framework that returns a lot of the action to the state level and the local level, it maintains guide rails, transparency, and consequences for making sure that states and districts have the flexibility to do what works to meet the needs of all learners, but not the flexibility to do nothing. Not the flexibility to do nothing in a high school that persistently has a graduation rate of less than 67%. Not the flexibility to do nothing about the Title I schools that perform in the bottom 5%. And not the flexibility to do nothing about schools that have disaggregated subgroups that fail to make progress. Rather, it provides a mechanism, assistance, and help to reach more families and help them succeed. There's flexibility for testing. One of the requests from our state of Colorado was to use the ACT test as their high school test. I'm proud to say that this would put that concept in statute. Another key priority that I've worked on as the founder of 2 charter schools has been charter schools. And I think that we can get to charter school language that reflects widely popular charter school bills that have passed the House in prior sessions that help encourage increased diversity in schools that are designed to serve disadvantaged kids and provide them with educational opportunities they don't yet have. I think there's a great opportunity for the members to pick up where the staff has taken this bill. They've taken us to the, we're in football season here. I know the Broncos lost the other day, but they've taken us to the 1-yard line, and I think with some fine tuning, we can get this across the goalposts. I hope and call upon my colleagues to offer amendments in the spirit of bipartisan improvement of this bill, of common sense and practical improvement. Hopefully we're past the ideological posturing, the positions we know the other side can accept. And I'm confident that the brilliant work that the staff has done can be improved even more by the deliberative work of the legislators that are here on this conference committee, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman, and now turning to Pennsylvania, Senator Casey.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Chairman Klein, Chairman Alexander, are both of our ranking members, Ranking Member Murray and Ranking Member Scott. We're grateful for your work. In the interest of time, I'll just highlight 3 issues briefly and ask consent to submit a longer statement. Number 1, early learning, pre-kindergarten education. We've made progress on this, and I appreciate that progress. I still think we have a long way to go to ensure that we meet what I think is the basic test, which is ensuring that we provide every possible opportunity so that children can learn more now, meaning when they're very young, and earn more later, making sure that linkage is there between learning and earning, so we still have a ways to go, but I appreciate the progress. Students with disabilities, another area of progress. We're grateful for that, and we're grateful that this bipartisan effort has yielded good progress there. Thirdly, an area where we didn't make any progress, I'm sad to say, but I want to raise it and keep talking about it and focusing on it, and that's the issue of bullying. The ultimate betrayal of a child when they're the subject of bullying in school for a wide variety of reasons, some of them children with, in fact, a disability. We have a long, long way to go as a nation in confronting bullying. Just by way of good highlights, though, accountability, flexibility for states and districts, and some good progress on making sure we're doing less in the way of suspensions and expulsions and more in the way of creating an opportunity and an atmosphere for learning. So it's a great bipartisan effort, and we're grateful for this conference committee. Thank you.
I thank the senator. The gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Thompson.
Well, thank you, Chairman Klein, Ranking Member Scott, Senators Alexander and Murray, and our distinguished colleagues. I'm I am truly grateful for the opportunity to take part in this conference, which is another step in overhauling No Child Left Behind and taking a giant step in the right direction when it comes to empowering our state governments and our local education authorities to better serve this country's young learners. This occasion marks the culmination of years of hard work towards an admirable cause to ensure that all of our nation's children have the opportunity to succeed. And while this process has at times underlined our differences of opinions, it has allowed us to agree on the importance of a quality education. And we're here today as a statement of endless support for our nation's children. Now, I'm confident that by the end of this conference, we will have put our education system on a 4-year path to stable progression, freeing our teachers and school districts from federal adequate yearly progress mandates, allowing states to disengage from the Common Core obligations, and boosting parental engagement in education, which allow for the scholastic innovation that has been stifled for far too long. And although both of these bills we will be discussing during this conference includes provisions that will undoubtedly improve our education system, I'd be remiss not to remind my colleagues of the ongoing need to strengthen the Title I program by establishing a more equitable distribution system through the formula. As you know, the Title I program is the foundation of the federal commitment to closing the achievement gap between low income and other students. The formula by which Title I funds are distributed is the key element of ensuring that critical, limited federal resources are allocated to the neediest populations of children across our nation. And there's growing concern that the current Title I formula puts certain children at a disadvantage solely based on their geographic location or the size of their school. And attempting to address this inequity is not an effort to pit city schools versus rural schools or large schools against small schools. Rather, it's an acknowledgement of our duty as lawmakers to correct any unintended consequences of the policies we enact. There's no doubt in my mind that every person in this room would support finding ways to improve the rate at which disadvantaged children achieve educational success. Instead of being an issue that divides us, ensuring the fairness of Title I formula distribution should be one that unites us. I believe it's also important that we recognize the staff of the House Education Workforce Committee and the staff of the Senate Committee on both sides of the aisle who have worked tirelessly to help us get to this point. Their dedication is commendable and greatly appreciated, and I look forward to working with my colleagues both today and in the future to move meaningful education reform through the conference process and to the President's desk. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. Now turning to the senator from Maine. Senator Collins, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Chairman Klein, Chairman Alexander, Ranking Member Scott, and Ranking Member Murray for all of your hard work in bringing this conference together and for your extraordinary leadership in reforming the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. Congressional action to remedy the serious problems with No Child Left Behind while preserving the valuable parts of the law is long overdue. NCLB was a well-intentioned law. Perhaps I'm one of the few members that was on the Senate committee when it was passed. Whether I should admit that or not is another issue. But the fact is that high-stakes testing and unrealistic 100% proficiency goals do not raise aspirations. They dispirit those who are committed to a high-quality education for our students. Greater flexibility for state departments of education and for local schools is paramount. We want to empower states to set the goals for their schools and students and give them much-needed flexibility over how to improve student achievement while eliminating the burdensome parts of the law, such as the definition of a highly qualified teacher, which has been a real problem in some of the small schools in Maine, where people teach many different subjects. I'm pleased that the conference framework would extend the Rural Education Achievement Program, known as REAP. This was a law that I authored along with former Senator Kent Conrad. It provides financial assistance to rural schools and districts to help them address their unique local needs. It has helped to support new technology in classrooms, professional development, and array of programs for schools that often lack the capacity and the grant writers that larger schools have to apply for competitive grants. I also want to highlight that the conference recommendation retains from the Senate bill a pilot project to support states that are designing alternative assessment systems based on student proficiency, not just traditional tests. The federal government should cooperate with the states and school districts that are designing new assessment systems, and this pilot project is an important step in that direction. Again, I want to thank the leaders of both the House and Senate committees for your leadership and work in crafting this important bipartisan bill. I would ask consent that my longer statement be included in the record. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection. The gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Wilson, you're recognized.
I want to thank Chairman Alexander and Klein and Ranking Members Murray and Scott for their work to create a bipartisan framework for reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. I want to give a special shout out to Chairman Alexander, who visited my school in 1992 when he was Secretary of Education under President H.W. Bush and awarded us an America 2000 Break the Mold School Award from the President. My experiences in life's work and education leave me humbled and honored to be a part of this process. As a child of segregated schools and as a teacher, I saw unequal access to education and a lack of funding exacerbate the seemingly unsurmountable obstacles to learning that far too many children carried with them into the classroom. ESEA has proved pivotal for allocating resources to children most in need. It ensures more children of color get the equal access to a quality education they deserve. I hope the compromise that emerges from this conference builds on and furthers these gains. As a principal of a school under No Child Left Behind, I saw how the untenable environment of excessive high-stakes testing negatively impacted learning. I'm glad this framework provides resources to states for cutting ineffective tests and removes federal mandates for teacher evaluations. However, coming from Florida, a state that has stumbled so often in this area, I'm concerned that this framework does not do enough to allow the Secretary of Education to intervene in states with detrimental policies. As someone who's dedicated my life to dropout prevention, I'm glad to see funding for mentoring for children at risk of dropping out. However, I wish this framework went further. Currently, ESEA does little to help or encourage states to address dropout prevention, and direct federal spending on dropout prevention amounts to less than $10 per dropout. We must do better. We must encourage states to establish and support effective dropout prevention and reentry programs. I look forward to moving forward with the extremely important task of finding a compromise that honors the civil rights promises enshrined in ESEA, defends the gains made by the law, and moves us closer to equal opportunity in education for all. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. I now recognize my colleague from Minnesota, Senator Franken.
Thank you, my colleague from Minnesota, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, we've been living under No Child Left Behind for 13 years, and during that time we've learned what about NCLB works and a lot more about what doesn't work. Students, teachers, and parents across the country have been waiting for a long time for us to fix this law. The framework for ESEA reauthorization that is before us today builds a strong bipartisan foundation to reform our national education system. I want to thank Conference Committee leadership, Representatives Klein and Scott, Senators Alexander and Murray for their leadership on this bill. I'm pleased that I've been appointed to the conference and want to continue my work with my colleagues to make this bill as strong as possible for all of our kids. Over the last 6 years, I've met with principals, teachers, students, parents, and school administrators in Minnesota. These conversations have helped me develop my education priorities to help improve our schools, our communities, and our nation's future. I'm very pleased that many of my bipartisan priorities to improve student outcomes and close the achievement gap are reflected in the framework for reauthorization before us today, and I thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Button here. To the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Rokita.
Thank the chairman. I thank everyone for their hard work to date. Look forward to continuing that work. I find myself having the honor and duty of serving on my third conference committee, and I've noticed a pattern. Senator Murray's smiling at me with a look on her face like, 3? How lucky are you to only be on 3? But I've noticed a pattern, and that is Mick Jagger singing into my head, you can't always get what you want. If you try, sometimes you get what you need. So I know that sentiment's been alluded to by many of my colleagues here around the table, and I just want you to know I come to the table with that same sentiment and wanting to work on the solutions to this. Having said that, and being a co-author of the Student Success Act, which is H.R. 5, I find a lot of that bill in this framework, and I'm very pleased about that. First and foremost being that there is maybe not 6 waves from Sunday like in H.R. 5, but certainly a prohibition about using Common Core as a federal government prerequisite for a state to get its funding back or to somehow be punished, if it doesn't. And I think that whether you use, however you feel about Common Core, whether you think there's a boogeyman in it or not, the fact that states ought to be able to decide the standards it wants is very important. And so I think that's in here in the framework as we start off, and I think that's great. Second, the preservation and expansion of the charter school programs I think is very important as well. In my belief, when children have a choice, they also have a chance. And as we go into this negotiation, that framework is preserved and I think expanded, and I think that's great. H.R. 5 had nearly 70 programs, which we quote-unquote eliminated in a sense, but said that if a state wants to continue those programs, it could, or use money in a flexibility grant to do other things, it could do that as well. The pre-negotiation has shown that we have nearly 50 programs that we quote-unquote eliminate or disengage from the mandate thereof, and keep that flexibility grant. I think that is a good thing. Senator Enzi and I served on a budget conference committee earlier this year, however, and we set ourselves on some budget goals and caps and that sort of thing. I do notice that those caps from the first bicameral budget agreement in 11 years have been exceeded. Perhaps we can work on that a little bit. Regardless of how you feel about the federal footprint on education, the fact of the matter is, since we've been in this business since 1970 or so, we've increased education spending 300%, and student scores have not gone up in that same time period. So clearly, wherever you are on that issue, we can agree that throwing more money at a problem does not necessarily solve it, and that certainly is the case here. But appreciate the flexibility grant staying. And then, of course, and has been said, we eliminate this idea of adequate yearly progress. The stress that Senator Mikulski, Senator Murray talked about that we put on students and teachers to catch up to grade level within 1 year simply is unreasonable and unworkable. Senator Collins, you mentioned that as well. I'm glad we eliminate that and allow is the wrong word, to place the responsibility for determining what success is and how to measure it where it belongs, with our state and local school boards. So it seems to me that the theme, Mr. Chairman, of H.R. 5 continues in this framework, and that is we trust and expect from teachers, principals, local school boards, voters, and taxpayers education results more than we should trust or expect from having that done by federal bureaucrats. And I think that that deserves mentioning, that deserves praise, and that deserves my thanks as a co-author of H.R. 5 to the team that has got us to this point so far, and I look forward to being a constructive part of finishing this deal. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank the gentleman. Now the senator from Kansas, Senator Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am impressed by the influence of Mick Jagger on the committee. I might suggest that Ray Price wrote For the Good Times, and we could include that for the record, Lamar. I am pleased we have reached agreement to move forward on reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. This is long overdue, and I would like to acknowledge and commend, and that's in all caps and probably fireworks, the work of the chairman, Alexander, ranking member Patty Murray, John Klein. John, thank you so much. This is a real hallmark for your career. And ranking member Scott. The House of Representatives worked together to get us to this point. When we began our efforts to fix the broken No Child Left Behind law, I made it clear that I believed our children receive the best possible education when decisions are made at the local and the state level. Washington has no business, it seems to me, dictating to states and school districts what is best for the students they serve, and throughout the process, I have worked with my colleagues to ensure that federal resources are directed where they are needed and proven most effective at the local level. Now, perhaps this is not the best possible bill, but our leadership has worked very hard to put this together to put the best bill possible, if not historic. The conference recommendation puts an end to Washington mandates and allows Kansans and every other state to make their own decisions about the best way to improve education by returning K-12 education decision making to state and local control. We will ensure every child receives the highest quality education. Let me turn to Common Core, as has been mentioned, and the federal overreach in education. The Department of Education has incentivized and coerced states into implementing Common Core education standards. Some within our education community in Kansas have even called this practice a bribe. That may be a little strong. The administration made it a criteria for states to adopt Common Core standards to have a reasonable chance to receive federal funding. Under the multi-billion-dollar Race to the Top program, use federal funds to develop Common Core aligned tests. In response to this overreach, earlier this year I reintroduced the Local Level Act S-182 to explicitly prohibit the federal government's role and involvement in Common Core. My legislation would strictly forbid the federal government from intervening in the state's education standards, its curricula, and assessments to the use of incentives, mandates, grants, waivers, or any other form of manipulation. Simply put, my legislation will preserve state education autonomy. Now, if a state wishes, they can freely decide their own standards, including Common Core. I am pleased that the agreement before us includes the language from my local level act will once and for all end the federal government's ability to use any incentive or tool of coercion to force states to adopt Common Core or any set of standards at all by another name or some new set of standards. I want to thank Chairman Alexander and Ranking Member Patty Murray for including my language in the Senate version. And I wanted to start off by saying, like Henry VIII said to one of his wives, I won't keep you long, so I yield back.
Thanks, Pat. The gentlelady from Oregon, Ms. Bonamici.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's really an honor to serve on this bicameral, bipartisan conference. Since we're claiming theme songs, I might pick Teach Your Children Well. One of the primary reasons I came to Congress was to strengthen public education in our country, so I'm very optimistic that my colleagues from both sides of the aisle have been willing to negotiate and reach consensus on a framework that charts a course for replacing the unpopular No Child Left Behind with a law that better supports students, educators, and families. In particular, I thank Chairman Klein, Ranking Member Scott, Chairman Alexander, and Ranking Member Murray, as well as their hardworking staffs for their remarkable leadership that's brought us here today. This conference committee is a reminder of what Congress can do and accomplish when its members work together, setting differences aside and finding common ground. The framework agreement we're working from is not perfect. I'm concerned that some targeted funding for well-rounded education has been lost to consolidation, for example, and I'm not sure the framework adequately addresses resource gaps. But overall, the framework agreement represents a significant improvement for our nation's schools. I commend my colleagues for authorizing higher levels of funding for K-12 programs, emphasizing the use of multiple measures in accountability, increasing support for English learners, directing resources towards schools with the greatest needs, and recognizing the importance of a well-rounded education. I'm especially pleased that the framework includes provisions from the Support Making Assessments Reliable and Timely, or SMART Act, bipartisan legislation I championed along with my friend from Wisconsin, Senator Baldwin. This language will help schools eliminate duplicative and unnecessary tests. One concern I hear frequently from educators and students and their parents is that test scores are overemphasized. It makes sense to help schools eliminate tests that are not useful and make better use of the assessments that support teaching and learning and those that help shine a light on proficiency and growth. Put simply, we need fewer, better assessments, and the framework advances this goal. I look forward to working with each of my colleagues on this conference committee to replace the one-size-fits-all mandates of No Child Left Behind with a law that lives up to the civil rights legacy of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. Together, we can build upon the framework agreement and finalize legislation that strikes an appropriate balance between local flexibility and the safeguards necessary for equitable opportunities and outcomes for all students. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The senator from Colorado.
Thank you, Chairman Klein, and thank you to you and Chairman Alexander and Congressman Scott and Senator Murray for your inspired leadership. I also want to thank teachers and students and parents and principals all across Colorado who have helped me think about the reauthorization of this law. It is long past time to reauthorize this law. As Chairman Alexander said, no one else in America gets to turn their homework in 7 years late, and we shouldn't be allowed to do that either. This process has been a rare exception around here of bipartisan work, and I think in addition to the skillful leadership in both chambers, another reason for that, I suspect, is that if you had a rally tomorrow to keep No Child Left Behind the same on the steps of the Capitol, literally nobody would come. As we sit here today, there are teachers and there are kids all over America, all over Colorado, working incredibly hard, often under adverse circumstances, trying to teach and trying to learn. We need to be honest about what our kids in poverty face in this country, including our kids in color. By the time a poor child in the United States gets to kindergarten, she will have heard 30 million fewer words than her more affluent peers. In 2015, a low-income student in this country, as we sit here today, has a 1 in 5 chance of being able to read at grade level by the 4th grade. If we don't change what we do in terms of our delivery of K-12 education and access to higher education, only 9 out of 100 kids born into poverty in the United States of America will graduate with a college degree or its equivalent. There are 100 seats and 100 desks in the Senate chamber. If those represented poor kids in America, 9 of those seats would be filled by college graduates, 91 of them would not be. I can't think of anything that is more at war with who we are as a country and who we think and how we think about America than those results. And for too many of our children, the education system we have actually reinforces the profound opportunity gap that they face. No Child Left Behind, has been said, had many flaws, but it did force us for the first time to face the facts about how kids in poverty are doing in our schools, and they are not doing well. It exposes schools that are persistently low performing and shed light on the achievement gap. It pushed districts like Denver to step up and make meaningful change. This bill maintains those core components. It builds on our successes while turning us away from the significant failed practices of the past. As the former superintendent of the Denver Public Schools and as the parent of 3 daughters that attend the Denver Public Schools, I know that there are many things the federal government cannot and should not do when it comes to education. Above all else, Washington cannot and should not micromanage our schools or our school districts. This bill eliminates NCLB's one-size-fits-all approach to education and re-empowers those closest to our children to make decisions. It does so while also demanding that states and districts take action to turn around schools that consistently fail our children. This bill also requires transparency about how much we're investing in high and low poverty schools, includes greater support for our teachers and school leaders in areas like preparation and retention, teacher leadership opportunities, residency programs, and training for principals, and it includes better support for rural schools and more funding for innovation. Fixing No Child Left Behind is just one step, but it should make some meaningful progress for our students, our teachers, and schools all across Colorado. And I can appreciate that we should have a debate about what level of government should do what. But I believe that there is no doubt that we have a vital national interest in making sure that education liberates all children to fulfill their potential. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the senator. Turning now to the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Grothman. You're recognized.
Thank you. It's taken me 20 years, but I finally get to be on a committee with Senator Baldwin, so it's a great day. Glad to be here. I was in the state legislature when a bipartisan group of congressmen decided to treat the state legislatures and school boards with contempt by passing No Child Left Behind. Within months, virtually every local superintendent knew what every student of our Constitution already anticipated, that bill was deeply flawed. But it took us 14 years to make adjustments that everybody back home knows should have been made at the time. I'm glad we're taking this first step towards getting the federal government out of our schools. We still have a lot to work to do. I think it's a little bit embarrassing that we're celebrating clearing the 18 trillion mark in debt by asking for a 12% increase in spending, albeit over 5 years. That's going in the wrong direction. I think we need a lot more education here as far as the role of the federal government. One of my colleagues here said that parents back home were counting on us. The only parents back home who should be counting on us to improve schools are parents who flunk civics, right? That's up to the state legislatures and school boards to improve schools, not us. It was also a little bit concerning that I heard one of my colleagues say that we ought to be dealing with bullying here in Congress. I thought it was a little bit of an imposition on local school districts when state legislators wanted to impose bullying policies, much less U.S. senators. Nevertheless, I'm glad to be here. It's already in education, and I'd like to thank my chairman for putting me on this committee.
I thank the gentleman, and you're welcome. Turning now to our former colleague on this side of the table in the House, my good friend, the senator from Georgia, Senator Isaacson.
Well, thank you, Chairman Klein, and Chairman Alexander and Ranking Member Murray, congratulations on your hard work, and Chairman Klein and Ranking Member Scott, congratulations on your work. We've taken a marathon race and taken it to the last 100 yards, and this is the beginning of the sprint to the end, which hopefully is going to see a reauthorization and a reform of the federal role in education. I remember a conversation Bobby Scott and I and Mike Castle had in the basement of the Capitol shortly after the completion of the Conference Committee on No Child Left Behind, when we acknowledged the fact that we had done a good job, but left reauthorized 7 years from then, we would have a disaster on our hands because AYB would be harder and harder to meet. Schools that were performing would turn out to be non-performing, and we'd be enemies. We proved that to be exactly correct. This legislation preserves the things that No Child Left Behind did, which are right, which disaggregate our children, focus on the growth of individual children, but return the governance of education and its oversight back to the local boards of education and the state boards of education. We in our federal role should be a cheerleader and someone that tries to promote public education, not one that becomes a suppressor or an oppressor of public education. It's been a pleasure for me to work on many facets of the bill. I'm not going to go into all of them now because why bring up something that's been done when you're at a successful point, and I hope this conference committee will be able to find common ground over the next couple of days so when we return after Thanksgiving we can adopt, hopefully unanimously, what will be a major breather for all the public education systems in America and a great step forward for public education. But again, Chairman Klein, Chairman Alexander, and Ranking Member Scott and Ranking Member Murray. It would not have happened without the four of you. I'm personally very grateful to you, and so are my 9 grandchildren. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the senator. We miss you over on this side of the aisle, but you're doing swell there. Still learning from you, Senator. The gentlelady from California, Ms. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And well, it's test time, and our test is to pass this bipartisan education bill. We have been trying, as everyone has said, to pass this new bill for 8 years. If Congress were a student, we surely would be failing. But just like we believe all students can succeed, we must also believe that Congress can succeed. It's time we give all students what they deserve. And we have a bill, of course, that has many compromises, a true bipartisan bill, and I want to thank the leaders, and I want to thank staff for helping to get us here. I'm excited about early education. Is there any better investment in our country other than pre-K? The accountability measures are not as strong as many civil rights groups would like, or frankly, I would like, and yet this bill will ensure that all kids get an equal shot. As George W. Bush said, it will protect against the, quote, soft bigotry of low expectations, unquote. And more local control is included too. We must make sure that the federal footprint in school district is reduced. Why? Because teachers, principals, and parents know their students best. We also must remember that having high standards does not mean standardizing education. Good teaching is an art, and teachers need freedom in the classroom to best support students. There are provisions to help limit overtesting and put fun and creativity back in schools. I had hoped that this bill would have done even more to support our teachers and principals. We need to make sure our educators, the heart of any school, are given good feedback and are effectively trained. We need to work with teachers and principals as partners. We put them in charge of our kids, but we're not always willing to ask them what they need. Evaluations have been referenced, but it's vague. We shouldn't prescribe exactly what educators need to do, but we should make sure all stakeholders are involved in deciding. So I'll be offering an amendment to make that a reality. I served 9 years on the school board of one of the largest school districts in the country, and I know what it means to lead a local school district that is at the whim of the federal government. This bill renews the importance of local control. In order to get our kids ready to lead a community, we must make sure our community is taking care of our kids. And Mr. Chairman, I'm proud to support this bill with my colleagues across the aisle. It's a good bill. It's one built on compromise. Let's teach our children a lesson on teamwork by getting this bill through now, while supporting principals and teachers, the very heart of this work. Thank you.
I thank the gentlelady. Turning to another former member of the House who we miss, the senator from Wisconsin. Senator
Well,
Baldwin.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to add my voice to the chorus of all who are appreciating the work of our leadership and our staff to get us to this important point. And I want to say particularly to my colleagues on the Senate Help Committee and the chairman and ranking member how much I respect this process. I know we had a chance to talk about this undertaking before it ever commenced, and I am not only proud of what the committee did, but how the committee did it, and I thank you for that. I'm also encouraged by the most recent conversations that brought us to this framework for continuing to get to the finish line on reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. I hail from a state that focused on the belief that every child deserves a high-quality, free public education to the extent that it enshrined it in its state constitution. The Wisconsin Constitution was one of the first in the country to enshrine that principle. And as we have all discussed, the No Child Left Behind Act is well over a decade old, and a law that we can almost universally agree has failed in many ways to serve our children and our country well. The framework before us today is a significant step forward in the process to finally fix No Child Left Behind and put an end to a one-size-fits-all approach that simply didn't work for our states, our school districts, and our students. And it will help ensure that every child, no matter what the circumstances into which they were born into this great country, has the opportunity to achieve. I am pleased that this bipartisan framework takes steps to address the deficiencies of No Child Left Behind while ensuring that every student can succeed. It does provide greater flexibility and more long-term certainty for our states and our schools than the current waiver system can possibly provide. And it holds states and schools accountable for providing all students access to a quality education. And it supports efforts to provide students with a well-rounded education and help them be healthy and safe while they learn. And it incorporates priorities that I have championed together with my colleagues in the Senate, such as helping to reduce the unnecessary and redundant testing and support the smart use of education technology. Again, I want to thank the leadership of both the Senate and House committees, and I look forward to continuing work with all of the members of this conference committee to get across the finish line. Thank you.
Thank the senator. The gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Messer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank Speaker Ryan, Chairman Klein for the appointment to this conference. I want to thank Senators Alexander and Murray, Ranking Member Scott, along with all of my colleagues here for your leadership on this important legislation. And lastly, I too want to thank the committee staff for all of their hard work, sleepless nights spent on this important legislation for America's children. A quality education is the gateway to opportunity in modern America. America's families know this. That's why they fight so hard every day to make sure their kids get an opportunity to go to a great school. And that's really what this debate should be all about, ensuring that every kid in America has a chance. Unfortunately, the No Child Left Behind Act, while well-intentioned, has not produced the results our kids deserve. We need a new approach, one that restores local control to administrators, teachers, and the parents who are best positioned to make education decisions for America's students. This is the first time in over a decade that we've had an opportunity to do just that. Through this bill, we can end the biggest mistakes, the one-size-fits-all approach of No Child Left Behind. We can help stop efforts to require a national Common Core curriculum. We can put an end to federal high-stakes testing mandates, and we can consolidate dozens of duplicative federal programs, saving money that can be better spent in the classroom. Of course, as others have said, I would like to see more. I am an unapologetic champion of choice in education in America. And I believe we cannot rest as a nation until every family and every child has the opportunity to go to a great school. This bill won't quite allow us to promise that. But it is a major step in the right direction. And I look forward to working with my colleagues to make the bill even better. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Massachusetts, Ms. Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our country's founders knew the strength of our democracy depends on the education of our people. And today, if we want to preserve the American dream and our way of life, we must hold firm to that value that a quality public education be accessible to all, no matter where they live or the size of their parents' bank account. That's why this bill is so important to our country, and that's why I am so grateful to Chairman Klein, Chairman Alexander, Ranking Member Murray, Ranking Member Scott, and your respective staffs for your incredible work bringing this compromise bill before us, and I am honored to be part of this committee. We live in an extraordinary time in the middle of a technology revolution that is and will continue to have a profound effect on how we communicate, do business, cure disease, and shape our economy. At the same time, growing income inequality threatens to divide our country permanently into haves and have-nots. Through this bill, we can take advantage of the remarkable point in history and meet the challenges of our times. This committee has a chance to build on the unrealized promise of No Child Left Behind, but by ensuring that every child, no matter their race, income, disability, or family situation, has access to high-quality public education. We can hold schools accountable without setting up our teachers and students for failure and narrowing our definition of education to exclude the arts, music, and health. And when schools do fall short, let's provide for a community-based response that includes educators in addition to federal safeguards. We know that poverty is a barrier to success for our children, and that education holds the promise of overcoming this barrier. Let's use this bill to expand resources for schools serving low-income children. I hope we will address the particular needs of homeless and foster children, support children who have experienced trauma, and meet the needs of children who are victims of violence, toxic stress, and physical or sexual abuse. To ensure all children can participate in our changing economy, we must guarantee that students have the opportunity for STEM education, access to quality early education, and that we bridge the technology divide. This bill is a blueprint for our future and will play a critical role in our ability to reach our economic potential. I am honored to serve on this committee, and I look forward to working with each of you to ensure that educational opportunity remains a right for all children. Thank you.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Corbello.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you, Mr. Scott, and Senators Alexander and Murray for their work to bring us together here. I also want to thank my subcommittee chairman, Mr. Rokita, for working with me throughout this process to make sure that my district's priorities were taken into account. As a school board member for 4 years in Miami-Dade County, I became extremely familiar with both the successes and the failures of No Child Left Behind. The spirit of No Child Left Behind is that every student counts, no matter the color of their skin, their zip code, whether or not they speak with an accent. And here in this reauthorization, I believe we are poised to capture that spirit, that inspiration, while at the same time mitigating or improving upon the failures of No Child Left Behind, including an overly rigid accountability system and, quite frankly, a lack of fairness for students like English language learners who, again, we are poised to provide relief for them, for their teachers, and for their schools in this reauthorization. So I just feel fortunate to be able to be a small part of this process, and I thank the chairman and everyone else for their great work.
I thank the gentleman, the senator from Connecticut.
Thank you very much, Chairman Klein. Thank you, Representative Scott. A special word of thanks to Senator Alexander and Senator Murray, who brought to our committee a truly bipartisan process. To paraphrase Connecticut's own Mark Twain, reports of the death of conference committees have apparently been greatly exaggerated, and it is pretty wonderful to be on my first here. The prism through which I'm going to view this conference report is pretty simple. I don't think it's worthwhile for the federal government to pass a national education law unless it is also a civil rights law. In fact, the whole reason the federal government ever got into the debate about the quality of local education was to protect civil rights. And this city has had its finest moments when standing up for the idea that children in this country should get a quality education no matter their race or their address or their learning ability. And whether we want to acknowledge it or not, there are political pressures in America that cause minority kids and disabled kids and poor kids to get an education that doesn't equal that of their white or non-disabled or more affluent peers. And we just shouldn't simply accept the status quo, where nationally the graduation rate for African-American students is 16 percentage points lower than their white peers, where an African-American boy is twice as likely to get suspended or expelled than a white classmate for the exact same misbehavior, or where only 1/4 of Latino students are performing at grade level in 4th grade math, half the rate of their 4th grade white peers. These jarring statistics, they represent a stain on the conscience of our country. And maybe the only redeeming quality of No Child Left Behind was that it forced us to recognize our persistent failure to meet the needs of our most vulnerable students. And it put pressure on all of us to do better. Now, NCLB has also taught us how accountability can go wrong. That's why it would be a mistake for the federal government to set the standards for minority kids or low-performing schools. And it would be unhelpful for the improvement interventions to be dictated by Washington. And here's where the details matter, because we need to set high expectations without being heavy-handed or prescriptive. And we have to get this right, because the accountability framework in this bill will serve as a fail-safe, a bottom-line expectation for how millions of historically marginalized children should be treated in this country. I'm very pleased that this framework includes provisions that address this important responsibility and this delicate balance, and I look forward to working with all of you through the coming weeks to ensure that this final conference report that we ultimately sign is consistent with the best traditions of the United States Congress, grounded in civil rights.
I thank the senator. The senator now from Massachusetts, Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When President Johnson first signed the ESEA back in 1965, it was a landmark civil rights law. And I want to quote from what President Johnson said at the time. He said, "I know that education is the only valid passport from poverty, the only valid passport. I believe deeply no law I have signed or will ever sign means more to the future of America." Today, the majority of children in our public schools live in poverty, the majority. Think about that. This law is more important today than it has ever been, and I am pleased that many of my Democratic colleagues here today fought to ensure that an ESEA reauthorization lives up to the civil rights goals of the original law. In many ways, the bipartisan agreement represents a significant improvement in federal education law, relieving some of the pressure caused by standardized tests and respecting the vital work that teachers do every day. And I strongly support those changes. But ESEA is also about money. And it is critical that any agreement preserves basic safeguards to ensure that federal dollars are actually used to improve both schools and educational opportunities for children living in poverty, for children of color, for children with disabilities, and for other groups of kids who have been underserved, who have been mistreated, or who have been systematically denied even the most basic opportunities to get a good education. I voted against this bill in the Senate because it lacked even minimum safeguards to ensure that federal funds would be used effectively. And I was deeply concerned that billions of dollars in taxpayer money would not actually reach those schools and those students who need them most. I hope we'll be able to address those issues in a serious way in this conference so that we can emerge with a product that everyone, Republicans, Democrats, teachers, civil rights leaders, can support. Half a century ago, this country made a promise to support public education fully and fairly enough to create real opportunities, not just for some of our children, but for all of our children. It is time to live up to that promise. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I thank the members for their commitment to delivering an excellent education to every student in every school and to this conference process. The conference committee will meet again at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning to consider amendments and staff recommendations to resolve differences. So the staff, no sleep yet. This meeting of the conference committee stands adjourned.